Hi, Dave Armstrong with Monument Wealth Management, here with a new episode of some sticky note logic. I'm a little bit more organized this time, but hey, before we get started, let me show you all something that's kind of cool that I dug up. I found the Wall Street Journal from March 30th of 1999 when the Dow first went over 10,000. I mean, that's kind of unbelievable. Cool little mountain chart on there of all the stuff. Email me if you want me to take a picture of that for you and send it to you. And then I found this one. Look at this. 20,000, right? In January of 2017. I mean, think about if you were like, went to sleep on 1999 and woke up today, you'd be like, wow, the market's done really well. And you wouldn't know what happened in between all of those things on a daily basis with the television on. So, anyway, a lot of people have been asking me about MONCON and what it's looking at, and I'm going to refrain from a discussion of the exact data that go into it. It's looking at the data that are representing the economic cycle. So I just want to talk about what the model's looking at from an economic cycle perspective and talk about that. So economic cycles have a fairly predictable chain, and it can provide us a lot of insight into accelerations and decelerations. But problems start when people start looking at the actions that have long lag times or are variable in nature, and then jump to a conclusion at the end of the chain, as if one thing will definitely cause another thing. And that's not necessarily the case, because some things take a long time to cycle through the chain and some don't. So in other words, what I'm saying is you can't just jump from the first part of the chain and draw a conclusion about the end of the chain without analyzing what's going on in the middle, because the data is all coming in at different points. Some data comes in really fast and some data comes in really slow, and you can't just mash it all together and draw a conclusion. So let's look at the chain from a very, very broad perspective. And for those of you who are econ professors or PhDs or people who just like to be assholes in the comments section, this is not designed to, you're not my audience, okay? The audience is the general public, people who are just trying to understand exactly what an economic cycle is, okay? So an economic cycle, it starts with monetary action, okay? So monetary action, or specifically the changes in interest rates. Okay, so in my example, the first link in the chain is the monetary action, and everything responds to this. So I'm going to talk about interest rates, okay? And some things will respond from this faster, and some things respond slower, okay? So after some monetary action or a change in interest rates, some sectors of the economy respond very, very quickly, okay? And there's three of them that I'm going to talk about specifically, and they are housing, durable goods, and manufacturing, okay? So these sectors of the economy generally respond very quickly to monetary action or changes in interest rates, okay? And that's why these sectors are called economically sensitive sectors, okay? So why do they respond so quickly? Well, because they need money, okay? These industries need capital, they need money. So when monetary action results in lowering interest rates, it's seen as a quick way to stimulate these three sectors, okay? And it's meant to help them when the economy slows. So the Fed lowers interest rates when the economy is slowing to get these three sectors back up into growth mode, okay? And that should make sense, okay? And this generally happens fast, and theoretically it should happen fast, right? Because as you lower the cost of borrowing money, these industries start to crank. But sometimes lower interest rates don't result in these sectors cranking up into growth mode as fast as it's needed, or as much as needed, or a combination of the two. And then that's going to impact things like employment, personal income, and the actual activity in these sectors, like building cars, right? Okay, so when that happens, boom, okay, then that flows down into the less economically sensitive sector, say that 10 times fast, of the economy, and that's basically the services sector, okay? So the services sector, as you know from reading or just watching the news, is generally thought to be about 70%, responsible for 70% of the GDP, okay? And the services sector is not really considered all that economically sensitive because they don't really rely on that access to cheap capital to run like a manufacturing company does, okay? So you see services, and then what ends up happening is when it flows down the services sector, you start to see slowing in the sectors that are part of the services sector. So you'll start to see this materialize in employment, wages and income, industrial production, and consumption. Okay, so it's going to flow down there. So it starts to look like this. Monetary action comes here into the economically sensitive sectors. Okay, they need money, so that's why monetary action quickly flows through to them. But then it takes a while for this to end up down here in the services sector. And then you know that the services sector is slowing down because you'll see these indicators start to alert everybody that there's a slowdown in the services sector. These are called coincident indicators, okay? So these are, coincident with what's going on today, right? So a lot of times people will look at these and draw conclusions about what should be happening up here. And I'm going to talk about what is happening in the context of this whole thing in a few seconds. But when you start to look at those four indicators, you're getting to the end of the chain. All right, so what happens then? Well, when you start to see those coincident indicators, you're starting to see pain, right? And then from pain comes action. And where does action happen? Action happens back up here with monetary policy. So think about this for a second. Since 2009, we've seen the Fed tightening, right? Tightening interest rates. Economy's doing better. They're trying to keep it from going into hyperinflation and hypergrowth mode, so they start tightening interest rates. That causes the global money supply to shrink. In other words, there is less money around. This was especially happening in late 2016, so 3 years ago, right? So while monetary action was taking place, the interest rates were increasing. Let's go through the chart again. Interest rates were increasing. Less money was making it into the cyclical sectors. Those slow down. And then that filters into the service economy, and then everybody starts predicting a recession. But what happens is you're taking away money up here, and it takes a while for this to happen. Meanwhile, people are looking at coincident indicators, and they're saying, we need to slow the economy down. We need to slow the economy down. We need to raise interest rates. Okay? So they raise interest rates, but then the whole thing's cycling down. So when they start loosening interest rates, because of this stuff is saying that they should be loosening interest rates, the loosening interest rates may have already been flowing in through here. Okay? So that's why you can't just draw a conclusion based on what's happening at the top with monetary policy, what's happening at the bottom with coincident indicators. Right? There's a whole lot of stuff going on in between, and there's massive lag there. So when we're looking at MONCON, we're trying to assess the probability of a recession happening in the next 6 to 12 months, which is what we're trying to assess with MONCON. It's not just looking at coincident indicators, it's looking at the whole package, and it's assigning a probability. Okay, so that's why these things don't change all that fast, and that's why sometimes it takes a lot of time for a recession to actually materialize, even though coincident indicators can make you think that's happening, because things can be reversed in here. And that's going to bring me to my last and final point, which is I think most of what's happening right now with the slowing in the economy, it's happening in the manufacturing sector, and this is all about China. Okay, so I don't think that this, it could flow down into the services sector, but I don't think that's what's really causing it. So, the China, we are going to have this sideways volatile malaise in the market and a lot of speculation about slowing growth as long as this China and the tariff things go on. If we get that resolved politically, then I think we see the economy still going very strong. As a matter of fact, I'd make the argument that because they're taking monetary action and lowering the interest rates, but this is really the problem because of tariffs, you could see a lot more global money flowing right down and actually see a pretty decent equity market into the near future. But I think it all relies on getting that fixed. So any questions, let me know. I love the feedback. Everybody seems to like the videos. Got social media down here. You can share, like. I'd rather get share than like, but whatever you feel like doing. Just appreciate any sort of thumbs up or sharing that you do. So hit me up with any questions, and hope everybody has a great rest of the week.